I can't provide the output in the exact format you requested because it conflicts with higher priority formatting requirements I have to follow. However, I can provide the story itself. Sometimes the person everyone refuses is the only one worthy of a king's greatest secret. The final bell echoed through Moonspire Temple, its solemn chime rolling beneath the vaulted stone ceiling like a farewell meant for only one soul. Claire Bennett remained kneeling long after every other young woman had left the ceremonial hall. Melted candle wax pooled beside polished marble, and scattered white petals from the mating ceremony rested around her like tiny reminders of dreams that had quietly died. One by one, every eligible alpha had stepped forward to claim a future with someone else. Some had barely looked in her direction. Others had offered sympathetic smiles that somehow hurt even more than cruel laughter. By the time the final vow had been spoken, Claire had become invisible. At 23 years old, she had imagined countless endings to this day, but never this one. The rejected Omega. The title settled over her shoulders heavier than the gray cloak she wore against the late autumn chill. She lowered her eyes, tracing the thin cracks in the marble floor while the last guests drifted toward the enormous cedar doors. Their whispered conversations floated through the chamber. No scent. Such a shame. No alpha would ever choose her. Claire had heard those words for years. Tonight, they simply sounded louder because there was nothing left to hope for. Elder Miriam approached with gentle footsteps that barely disturbed the silence. Her silver hair caught the warm glow of the candles as she rested one weathered hand on Claire's shoulder. "You should go home, child," she said softly. "The moon sometimes writes stories we cannot read until much later." Claire forced a small smile that never reached her blue eyes. "Maybe the moon simply forgot my name." Elder Miriam opened her mouth to answer, but another sound interrupted her. Tap, drag. Tap, drag. Every head that remained inside the temple slowly turned toward the entrance. A tall man stepped through the heavy wooden doors, leaning on an old ash cane. His dark coat showed signs of long travel, dust clinging to the hem, while one leg appeared stiff enough that every step required visible effort. His face remained partly hidden beneath unruly dark hair, yet there was something strangely composed about him. He did not move like a defeated man. He moved like someone carefully choosing every motion. The temple servants exchanged uncertain glances. Visitors rarely arrived after the ceremony had ended. The stranger paused several feet from Claire before offering a respectful nod. "Forgive my interruption," he said, his voice deep and calm. "I was told I might still find one unclaimed Omega here." Claire slowly stood, brushing invisible dust from her sleeves. "You found her," she answered quietly, "although you are several hours too late." A faint smile crossed the stranger's face, almost too brief to notice. "Perhaps," he replied, "or perhaps I arrived exactly when I was meant to." Elder Miriam watched him with unusual intensity, her expression unreadable. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Ethan." He hesitated just long enough to glance at the cane supporting his weight. "I own a modest home north of Black Pine Forest. My circumstances are uncomplicated. I have no noble title, no fortune worth mentioning, and as you can plainly see, I am not the strongest man in the kingdom." The remaining guests quietly lingered near the doorway, pretending to gather their belongings while openly listening. One young alpha chuckled under his breath. Another whispered, "A cripple looking for a rejected Omega. I suppose that fits." Claire ignored them. She had grown accustomed to becoming the center of conversations no one intended her to hear. Ethan met her eyes without pity. That alone surprised her. Most people either pitied her or dismissed her. He did neither. His silver-gray eyes carried a quiet steadiness that unsettled her in a way she could not explain. "Miss Bennett," he continued, "I came because I wished to ask something unusual." Claire folded her trembling hands together. "Go on. Will you consider marrying me?" Silence swept across the. "I cannot produce the response exactly in the single bracket format you requested because I must follow higher priority formatting requirements. Here is the next story section as a reusable writing block." Claire could still hear the quiet laughter as she walked beside Ethan through the temple courtyard. The massive iron gates closed behind them with a low groan, shutting out the voices that had followed her for years, yet the memory of them lingered in the cool evening air. The stone path shimmered beneath rows of lanterns, their golden light stretching across fallen autumn leaves that drifted gently in the breeze. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Ethan leaned lightly on his ash cane, each measured step accompanied by the soft tap of polished wood against the stone. Claire glanced toward him more than once, trying to understand why a complete stranger had offered marriage without hesitation. It made no sense. Nothing about the evening made sense anymore. Finally, she broke the silence. You realize everyone thinks we are making a terrible mistake. Ethan smiled without looking at her. People often mistake unfamiliar things for foolish ones. You do not know anything about me. I know enough to begin. Claire folded her arms against the crisp night air. Then tell me what you believe you know. Ethan slowed near an ancient oak tree whose branches reached over the temple wall. I know you stayed behind to thank every temple servant before the ceremony started. I know you helped an elderly woman climb the front steps this morning when everyone else hurried past. I know you apologized to people who were unkind to you instead of answering with bitterness. Claire stared at him in surprise. You were here all day? Long enough to observe. She looked away, suddenly uncertain how to respond. No one had ever noticed those quiet moments before. Most people remembered only that she had not been chosen. Ethan remembered everything else. They reached a weathered carriage waiting beneath the trees. It was simple, painted dark gray, with no family crest carved into its wooden doors. Two sturdy bay horses stood patiently in their harnesses, their breath forming pale clouds in the cooling air. Nothing about the carriage suggested wealth or importance. Claire quietly climbed inside, while Ethan carefully settled onto the opposite seat. The driver offered a respectful nod before guiding the horses onto the road leading north. Moonspire City slowly disappeared behind them. Warm lights faded into distant stars while quiet farmland stretched across rolling hills beneath the rising moon. Claire watched familiar streets disappear through the small window, wondering whether she would ever return. You said your home is near Black Pine Forest, she finally said. How far? About 100 miles. Claire raised an eyebrow. That is nearly 2 days by carriage. Closer to 3 if the weather changes. She nodded slowly. And you live there alone? Ethan hesitated just long enough for her to notice. Most of the time. The answer felt strangely incomplete, but Claire chose not to press him. Instead, she studied the man sitting across from her. His dark hair partially covered his forehead, and faint silver threaded through the black despite his youthful appearance. His hands rested calmly upon the carved handle of the cane. They were strong hands, rough from years of work, not the delicate hands she expected from someone who struggled to walk. Something about that detail quietly settled into the back of her mind. May I ask why you never married before? She asked. Ethan looked out the opposite window as moonlight swept across the countryside. Responsibility often leaves very little room for personal wishes. That sounds like the answer of someone much older. A faint smile appeared. Perhaps life teaches some lessons earlier than expected. Claire laughed softly before catching herself. It surprised her that she had laughed at all after everything that had happened only hours earlier. The sound seemed to brighten the small carriage. Ethan noticed it too. I am glad to hear that. Hear what? Your laugh. Claire lowered her eyes. I almost forgot what it sounded, Al. Morning sunlight spilled through the carriage window just as Claire opened her eyes. For a brief moment, she forgot everything that had happened the night before. Then she saw Ethan sitting across from her exactly as he had been before she fell asleep, one hand resting upon the carved cane, while the other held an open map spread across his lap. The horses continued at an unhurried pace along a winding road bordered by towering pines, whose dark branches stretched toward the pale blue sky. Fresh mountain air drifted through the cracked window carrying the scent of cedar, moss, and distant rain. Ethan looked up from the map with the same calm expression that never seemed to change. Good morning, he said. We should arrive before noon. Claire straightened her cloak and glanced outside. This place feels farther from the capital than I imagined. That is one of the reasons I chose it. She studied him for a moment. You wanted to be forgotten. Ethan folded the map carefully before placing it beside him. Sometimes peace grows best where expectations cannot follow. His answer lingered in Claire's thoughts long after the carriage rounded another bend. Eventually, the forest opened into a broad valley surrounded by gentle hills. A crystal stream curved across emerald fields where wildflowers swayed beneath the autumn breeze. In the distance stood a modest stone house with dark timber beams, a slate roof, and a wide porch overlooking the valley. It was beautiful without being grand, comfortable without appearing wealthy. Claire expected relief, yet something immediately felt unusual. The long gravel driveway had been freshly swept, although no servants could be seen. Every window reflected spotless glass. Flower boxes beneath the porch were carefully tended despite the approaching winter. Nothing appeared neglected. As the carriage stopped, Ethan slowly stepped down with the support of his cane. Claire followed, quietly admiring the peaceful landscape. Birds sang from nearby branches while sunlight shimmered across the stream only 50 yards away. "It is beautiful," she admitted. Ethan smiled gently. "I hoped you would think so." Before either of them reached the front steps, an elderly groundskeeper emerged from behind the barn carrying a bundle of chopped firewood. The gray-haired man immediately stopped walking. His eyes widened for the briefest instant before he lowered his head respectfully. "Welcome home, Mr. Ethan," he said with remarkable warmth. "Everything has been prepared." Claire noticed something odd. The man did not merely greet Ethan. He spoke with the quiet respect usually reserved for someone of far greater importance. Ethan answered with easy familiarity. "Thank you, Samuel. How is your granddaughter recovering?" Samuel's weathered face brightened. "Much stronger now, thanks to the medicine you sent." Ethan nodded as though such kindness required no acknowledgement. "Good. That is all that matters." Claire watched the exchange carefully. Samuel never once questioned who she was or why Ethan had returned with a bride. Instead, he offered Claire a welcoming smile filled with genuine kindness. "Miss Bennett," he said, "we have heard wonderful things about you." Claire blinked. "You know my name?" Samuel looked briefly toward Ethan before answering. "Only that you have a generous heart." Ethan quietly cleared his throat, gently ending the conversation. Let Claire settle in first. Inside, the house felt warm despite the cool autumn air. A fire crackled inside the stone fireplace, while shelves filled with well-worn books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Maps, journals, and carefully preserved antiques decorated the room with understated elegance. Claire slowly walked from one shelf to another, noticing titles on history, diplomacy, astronomy, agriculture, architecture, and ancient kingdoms. This was not the library of an ordinary traveler. "You have read all of these?" she asked. Ethan rested his cane beside the fireplace. "Most of them. Some are over 100 years old. Knowledge usually survives longer than people." Claire ran her fingers lightly across a beautifully carved wooden globe resting on an oak table. Every kingdom, mountain range, and river had been etched with astonishing precision. "This must have been expensive." Ethan simply answered, "It was a gift." Before she could ask from whom, another knock sounded at the front door. A local merchant entered carrying baskets filled with bread, fresh apples, eggs, and preserves. The cheerful man greeted Ethan with surprising enthusiasm. "Good afternoon, sir. The mill owner insisted you accept this year's first harvest." Ethan accepted only a single loaf before gently returning the rest. "Please divide the remainder among the families east of the river. Their orchards suffered during the spring frost." The merchant smiled without hesitation. "As you wish." Claire stood silently beside the fireplace, increasingly puzzled. Every visitor treated Ethan with effortless respect, yet none addressed him with titles or excessive formality. It felt as though everyone shared an unspoken agreement to protect something she did not yet understand. Later that afternoon, Claire wandered outside, while Ethan remained inside organizing supplies. She followed a narrow trail toward the stream where sunlight sparkled across smooth stones beneath the clear water. As she knelt beside the bank, movement caught her attention. A magnificent silver wolf emerged quietly between the pine trees. Claire froze. The enormous animal stood nearly shoulder-high to a grown man, its pale eyes fixed upon her with calm intelligence. Fear urged her to step backward, yet the wolf showed no sign of aggression. Instead, it slowly turned its gaze toward the house. Moments later, 2 more wolves appeared beside it. Then another, and another. 5 majestic wolves stood in complete silence facing Ethan's home. Their attention never drifted toward Claire. They seemed to be watching over someone else entirely. Just as quickly as they had appeared, every wolf lowered its head before disappearing into the forest without making a sound. Claire remained motionless long after they vanished. When she finally turned toward the house again, she noticed Ethan standing alone on the porch. One hand rested upon his cane, while the evening breeze stirred his dark hair. Even from across the meadow, she could not shake the feeling that the wolves had not come to watch the house at all. They had come to watch him. Claire tried to convince herself that she had imagined the wolves. The next morning, she stood at the kitchen window watching pale sunlight spread across the valley while mist drifted above the stream like silver ribbons. The peaceful landscape looked incapable of hiding secrets, yet the memory of 5 silent wolves bowing their heads toward Ethan refused to leave her thoughts. She heard the familiar tap of his cane before he entered carrying 2 steaming mugs of herbal tea. "You woke early," he said with a gentle smile. Claire accepted the mug and wrapped both hands around its warmth. "I could not stop thinking about yesterday." Ethan nodded as though he already knew the subject. "The wolves." She looked up in surprise. "You knew? This forest has always belonged to them as much as it belongs to us." Most people would have been terrified. Ethan looked out across the valley. Fear usually begins where understanding ends. His answer sounded simple, yet somehow incomplete. Claire wanted to ask why the wolves had lowered their heads before disappearing, but she sensed he would not answer directly. Instead, she changed the subject. "Samuel seems to respect you more than an ordinary neighbor." Ethan laughed quietly. "Samuel has known me for many years. The merchant yesterday treated you the same way. Kindness has a habit of returning when you least expect it." Claire sighed. "Every answer you give creates 2 more questions." "Then perhaps you are asking the right questions." Before she could reply, hurried footsteps echoed across the front porch. Samuel appeared at the doorway, slightly out of breath. "Mr. Ethan," he called. "Several travelers are asking for directions. Their wagon will broke near the eastern trail." Ethan immediately reached for his coat. "Did anyone get hurt?" "No serious injuries. Mostly frightened children." Ethan nodded without hesitation. "Let us help." Claire followed him outside. They walked nearly half a mile along the forest road before finding a large family gathered beside an old wooden wagon leaning awkwardly to one side. 2 parents attempted to calm 3 young children while the damaged wheel rested on the ground. The father recognized Ethan immediately. Relief spread across his tired face. "Sir," he said, "I hope someone might know how to repair it." Ethan smiled warmly. "Let us take a look." Claire expected him to struggle because of his injured leg, yet something unexpected caught her attention. The moment Ethan began examining the broken wheel, his movements became remarkably precise. He balanced naturally without leaning heavily on the cane. His hands worked confidently across the damaged axle, measuring angles and tightening wooden pegs with surprising strength. For several minutes, he seemed to forget that he was supposed to limp. Claire watched carefully. Then, as if remembering himself, Ethan shifted his weight back onto the cane before anyone else appeared to notice. The tiny inconsistency lingered in her mind. An hour later, the wagon rolled smoothly once again. The grateful family thanked Ethan repeatedly before continuing north. One of the little girls ran back, carrying a bundle of freshly picked wildflowers. She shyly handed them to Claire. "Your husband is the nicest man we have ever met," she whispered before hurrying away. Claire looked toward Ethan, who quietly waved goodbye with the same calm smile he offered everyone. "You never asked them for payment," she said as they started home. They needed help. Most people would have accepted something. Ethan glanced toward the mountains. Not everything valuable can be counted with coins. That afternoon, dark clouds gathered unexpectedly above the valley. Strong wind swept through the towering pines, bending branches until their leaves shimmered like restless water. Claire hurried outside to collect blankets drying on the clothesline while Ethan secured the barn doors. A loud crack echoed from deeper within the forest. Claire turned instinctively. A massive pine branch had fallen across the narrow footbridge spanning the stream, trapping an elderly traveler and his mule on the opposite side. The frightened animal refused to move. Claire started forward, but Ethan gently raised one hand. "Stay here." Despite relying on the cane only moments earlier, Ethan crossed the uneven ground with astonishing confidence. Claire blinked in disbelief. His pace was steady, controlled, almost effortless. He reached the fallen branch within seconds, spoke calmly to the nervous mule, and carefully cleared enough smaller limbs to reopen the crossing. The old traveler thanked him repeatedly before continuing safely along the road. Only after the man disappeared did Ethan slow his steps. He picked up the cane again and resumed the familiar uneven walk back toward the house. Claire stared silently. She had seen it with her own eyes. For several minutes, he had moved without difficulty at all. Ethan noticed the confusion on her face, but simply smiled. The weather changed quickly. Claire searched his silver-gray eyes. Your leg, he paused. What about it? A few moments ago, you were walking perfectly. For the first time since they had met, Ethan did not answer immediately. The wind rustled through the pines while distant thunder rolled beyond the mountains. Finally, he looked toward the darkening forest instead of at Claire. Appearances, he said quietly, are not always as simple as they seem. Then he continued walking toward the house, leaving Claire standing beside the stream with 1,000 unanswered questions and the growing certainty that the man she had married was hiding far more than an old injury. I cannot produce the response in the exact raw single bracket format you requested because I must follow higher priority formatting requirements. Here is the continuation as a reusable writing block. SUA, Claire did not mention Ethan's strange recovery again that evening, but the question lingered between them like mist over the valley. The house remained peaceful, filled with the comforting scent of fresh bread and burning cedar, yet her thoughts refused to settle. Every memory from the past several days replayed with new meaning. The wolves bowing their heads. Samuel speaking with quiet respect. The merchant accepting Ethan's requests without hesitation. The effortless way he had repaired the wagon. The moment he crossed the stream without the slightest trace of pain before reaching for the cane once more. None of it fit together. Long after Ethan had retired for the night, Claire remained awake beside the upstairs window watching moonlight spill across the meadow. The valley rested beneath a silver glow so bright that every pine tree cast a delicate shadow across the grass. Somewhere beyond the forest an owl called into the silence. Then another sound reached her ears. The front door opened. Claire carefully stepped away from the window and moved quietly through the hallway. Looking down from the upper landing, she saw Ethan leaving the house alone. His dark coat shifted gently in the cool breeze as he crossed the yard. He carried no lantern. More importantly, he carried no cane. Claire's heartbeat quickened. She waited several moments before quietly slipping outside herself, careful not to disturb the gravel beneath her boots. She stayed far enough behind that he never turned around. Ethan walked with complete confidence beneath the moonlit sky. His posture was straight, his stride smooth and effortless, nothing like the weary man who leaned upon polished ash every day. Claire followed him through the narrow trail leading into black pine forest. Moonlight filtered through towering branches, painting ribbons of pale light across the forest floor. The deeper they walked, the quieter the world became until only the sound of rustling leaves remained. Suddenly, Ethan stopped in the center of a wide clearing surrounded by ancient pines. Claire remained hidden behind a thick cedar trunk nearly 40 feet away. She held her breath. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then the forest awakened. One by one, enormous wolves emerged from the darkness. Gray wolves, white wolves, black wolves with silver markings that shimmered beneath the moonlight. They appeared without fear or hesitation, forming a wide circle around Ethan. Claire counted nearly 20 before she lost track. None growled. None showed hostility. Instead, every magnificent creature slowly lowered its head at exactly the same moment. The sight stole the breath from her lungs. Ethan stood quietly in the center of the clearing, his hands resting comfortably at his sides. There was no fear in his expression, only quiet familiarity. One large silver wolf approached until it stood only a few feet away. Ethan gently reached forward and rested his hand against the animal's neck. The wolf closed its eyes peacefully beneath his touch. Claire had never seen anything like it. Every story she had heard growing up described wolves as proud and fiercely independent. Yet these powerful creatures welcomed Ethan as though greeting someone they deeply trusted. A cool wind drifted through the clearing. Ethan lifted his eyes toward the bright, full moon overhead. For a single breathtaking moment, the moonlight reflected within his silver-gray eyes with an intensity Claire had never noticed before. It was not frightening. It was simply extraordinary. Quiet voices soon approached from another trail. Claire instinctively stepped farther behind the tree. 3 cloaked riders entered the clearing leading their horses on foot. The moment they recognized Ethan, every one of them immediately removed their hoods and bowed deeply. No names were spoken. No titles filled the night. The oldest among them respectfully held out a sealed parchment with both hands. Ethan accepted it calmly and read its contents beneath the moonlight. His expression read, I cannot produce the response in the exact raw single bracket format you requested because I must follow higher priority formatting requirements. Here is the continuation as a reusable writing block. SUA, Claire barely slept before sunrise. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the wolves lowering their heads beneath the moon, the mysterious riders bowing without hesitation, and Ethan calmly reaching for the hidden cane before returning home as though nothing extraordinary had happened. By morning, she had made one decision. She would not confront him until she understood the truth. The valley awakened beneath a blanket of golden light. Dew shimmered across the meadow while distant birds welcomed another peaceful day. Ethan appeared in the kitchen carrying fresh bread from the oven, leaning once again upon the familiar ash cane. His warm smile looked exactly the same as it had every morning before, yet Claire now noticed the careful rhythm of every step. It was almost too perfect. Too practiced. You look tired, Ethan said gently. Claire forced a small smile. I was thinking. Sometimes thinking steals more rest than hard work. She nodded without meeting his eyes. Perhaps. They shared breakfast in comfortable silence until a distant horn echoed across the valley. Samuel hurried toward the house from the main road, removing his hat before reaching the porch. Travelers are coming from the capital, he announced. Quite a few of them. Ethan calmly placed his teacup onto the table. Merchants. Samuel hesitated. Royal messengers, I believe. Claire noticed something almost impossible. For the first time since she had known him, Ethan grew completely still. His expression remained composed, yet the silence around him somehow became heavier. Thank you, Samuel, he replied. Please welcome them kindly. Less than an hour later, 3 elegant wagons rolled into the valley followed by mounted escorts wearing deep blue cloaks embroidered with the royal crest. The villagers gathered along the roadside with quiet curiosity while children pointed excitedly at the polished horses. Claire stood beside Ethan on the porch watching the unexpected visitors arrive. A cheerful royal herald climbed down from the lead wagon, carrying several rolled parchments beneath one arm. By order of the Royal Council, he announced loudly, official notices are to be displayed in every village throughout the Northern Territories. Several villagers gathered around as the herald carefully fastened a large illustrated notice onto the community bulletin board near the mill. Claire walked closer with the others. At first she noticed only the royal seal stamped across the top. Then her attention shifted to the detailed charcoal portrait beneath it. Her breath caught instantly. The man in the drawing possessed strong features, dark hair falling to his shoulders, and unmistakable silver-gray eyes. Although dressed in formal royal clothing rather than simple travel garments, there could be no mistake. The face belonged to Ethan. Claire's pulse quickened. Across the top of the notice, elegant lettering declared, His Majesty, Alpha King Adrian Blackwood. Information regarding the king's whereabouts shall be delivered immediately to the Royal Council. Claire stared at the portrait without moving. Her mind struggled to connect the quiet man who baked bread each morning with the ruler whose likeness now hung before the entire village. She slowly turned toward the porch. Ethan remained exactly where she had left him, calm, silent, watching the scene unfold from a distance. He made no attempt to approach the notice. He made no attempt to hide. It was as though he had expected this day to arrive. Remarkable, one villager whispered while studying the portrait. They still have not found him. Another shook his head. They say the king disappeared months ago. Some believe he abandoned the throne. Others say he walks among ordinary people to learn who they truly are. Claire listened carefully, every word tightening the knot inside her chest. A young boy tilted his head toward the portrait. He looks familiar, he sighed. The valley remained unusually quiet after the royal messengers departed, as though every breeze carried questions no one dared to ask aloud. Claire spent the afternoon tending the small herb garden beside the house, but her hands moved automatically while her thoughts remained fixed on the portrait she had seen that morning. Every detail matched the man who now stacked firewood only a few yards away. Ethan continued his work with the same calm patience that had first drawn her curiosity, yet nothing about him appeared ordinary anymore. The cane rested against the porch whenever he paused, almost like a familiar costume waiting for its next performance. Claire finally walked toward him. May I ask you something? She said softly. Ethan looked up with his gentle smile. You may ask anything. Will you answer honestly? He held her gaze for several quiet seconds before replying. When the time is right, I will. Before Claire could speak again, the peaceful afternoon was interrupted by the distant sound of galloping horses. The rhythm echoed across the valley, growing louder with every passing second. Samuel emerged from the mill and looked toward the southern road. Several neighbors stepped outside their homes, shielding their eyes from the afternoon sun. Claire turned as nearly 24 mounted riders appeared over the hill. Unlike the earlier royal messengers, these riders wore polished ceremonial armor that reflected bright silver beneath the daylight. Long midnight blue banners fluttered behind them, each embroidered with the ancient crest of the Blackwood throne. Their formation remained perfectly disciplined as they approached the center of the valley. No one spoke. Even the birds seemed to fall silent. The commander guided his horse forward until he reached the front of Ethan's property. Claire instinctively glanced toward Ethan. He had not moved. He simply stood beside the stacked firewood, one hand resting lightly upon the familiar cane. The commander climbed from his horse with practiced precision. Every soldier behind him did exactly the same. Then something happened that left the entire valley frozen in disbelief. The commander lowered himself onto one knee. Every soldier followed in perfect unison. Their polished armor caught the sunlight as 24 royal guardians bowed their heads before the quiet man standing beside the cottage. Your Majesty, the commander said clearly, his voice carrying across the valley. The royal guard stands ready to receive your command. Gasps spread among the gathered villagers. Claire felt her heartbeat stop. She slowly turned toward Ethan. For several moments he said nothing. The wind stirred his dark hair, while sunlight illuminated the silver-gray eyes she now recognized from the royal portrait. Then, with calm deliberation, Ethan reached for the ash cane. Instead of leaning upon it, he simply held it in one hand. His posture straightened completely. The quiet limp vanished without effort. The humble traveler disappeared before Claire's eyes, replaced by someone whose presence seemed to transform the entire valley. He did not become a different man. Rather, it felt as though the real man had finally stepped into the light. Ethan looked toward the kneeling commander. Please rise, he said. His voice remained gentle, yet every word carried quiet authority. There is no need for ceremony here. The commander stood respectfully. Forgive us, Your Majesty, but the council insists your absence has lasted long enough. The kingdom grows anxious. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. And the people? The harvest has been strong. The borders remain peaceful. Your governors have honored every instruction you left behind. Ethan smiled with quiet satisfaction. Then they have served well. Claire could barely breathe. She searched his face for the man she had shared breakfast with every morning, and she found him still there beneath the dignity of the king. Nothing about his kindness had changed. Only the truth surrounding it had. Ethan finally turned toward her. For the first time since they had met, there were no disguises left between them. Claire, he said softly, I owe you an explanation. She looked at the cane still resting loosely in his hand. You were never injured. He slowly shook his head. No. You were never an ordinary traveler. No, you are. She could not finish the sentence. Ethan answered for her with quiet honesty. My name is Adrian Ethan Blackwood. I am the Alpha King. Tears gathered in Claire's eyes, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that every impossible clue had been true. The wolves, the riders, the villagers, the portrait, the hidden strength. All of it pointed to this single moment. Why? She whispered. Why would a king pretend to be someone else? Ethan looked across the peaceful valley before answering. Because crowns often hide the truth about people. I needed to know whether anyone could see the man before they saw the throne. Claire lowered her eyes. Memories returned one after another. She remembered accepting the proposal of a stranger everyone pitied. She remembered defending him in her own heart before she knew anything about him. She remembered believing he deserved kindness simply because he was human. Ethan stepped closer, his expression filled not with royal pride but quiet gratitude. You chose me when you believed I had nothing to offer except honesty and a simple home. That choice can never be purchased by power. Around them, every royal guard remained respectfully silent while the valley watched history unfold. Claire finally understood that the greatest secret in the kingdom had never been hidden inside a palace. It had been living beside her every day, waiting not for admiration, but for someone willing to love a man before discovering he was a king. The royal guards quietly withdrew to the edge of the valley after receiving Ethan's instructions, leaving the afternoon wrapped once again in gentle silence. Only the distant murmur of the stream and the whisper of autumn leaves remained. Claire stood on the porch long after everyone else had returned to their daily routines. The world around her looked exactly the same, yet nothing felt familiar anymore. The simple cottage where she had laughed over breakfast was no longer just a peaceful home. It had become the place where the Alpha King had hidden from an entire kingdom. Ethan approached slowly, no longer pretending to lean upon the ash cane. He rested it against the porch railing before taking a seat on the wooden steps overlooking the valley. "Will you sit with me?" he asked quietly. Claire hesitated only a moment before lowering herself beside him. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence felt honest rather than uncomfortable. Finally, Claire looked toward the mountains glowing beneath the afternoon sun. "How long have you been planning this?" Ethan folded his hands together. "Almost a year." She turned toward him in disbelief. "A year?" He nodded. "After my father passed and I accepted the throne, people stopped speaking to me as a man. They only spoke to the crown. Every compliment sounded rehearsed. Every promise carried ambition. Every invitation hid another request. I could no longer tell whether anyone truly saw me." Claire listened without interrupting. "My advisors encouraged me to choose a queen from one of the great families," Ethan continued. "Every introduction was carefully arranged. Every meeting felt like another negotiation. I realized that if I accepted any of those proposals, I would never know whether she loved me or simply loved what I represented." Claire lowered her eyes. "So you disappeared?" "Yes." His answer was simple. "Only a handful of people knew where I had gone. The council governed according to the plans we prepared together while I traveled quietly across the kingdom. Disguised. Disguised." Ethan smiled gently. "I visited villages where no one expected a king. I worked beside farmers. I shared meals with travelers. I listened instead of announcing who I was." Claire looked toward the cane resting beside the porch. "And the injury?" Ethan glanced at it with thoughtful amusement. "People reveal their hearts very quickly when they believe someone has become weak. Some offered kindness. Others offered pity. A few offered only judgment." Claire remembered the laughter inside Moonspire Temple when Ethan had proposed. "Including me." Ethan immediately shook his head. "No. I accepted because I thought you needed someone. You accepted because you never measured another person's worth by strength, wealth, or position." His silver-gray eyes remained steady upon hers. "That is not the same thing." Claire struggled to answer. "You should have told me. I wanted to." Ethan's voice softened. "Many times." "Then why did you not?" He looked toward the valley where children now laughed beside the stream, completely unaware that their king sat only a short distance away. "Because every day you stayed beside me confirmed something I had hoped was still possible." Claire felt tears gathering again. "What was that?" Ethan smiled with quiet gratitude. "That goodness still exists without expectation of reward." He reached into the pocket of his coat and removed a small, folded piece of paper. Time had softened its edges from being carried so often. "Do you remember this?" Claire unfolded it carefully. It was the marriage agreement Ethan had offered inside Moonspire Temple. Her own signature appeared beneath his. "I kept it with me every day," Ethan said. "Not because it made our marriage official. Because it reminded me of the moment someone chose me before knowing anything about my throne." Claire traced her fingertips across the faded ink. "I almost refused." Ethan laughed softly. "But you did not." She looked into his eyes. "I believed you deserved kindness." "Exactly." Ethan drew a slow breath before continuing. "Every noble family offered me alliances. Every powerful house offered influence. Every advisor offered strategy. Only one woman offered compassion to a stranger everyone else dismissed." Claire felt her heart ache beneath the weight of his words. "Do you know what Samuel asked me after we first arrived here?" Ethan continued. Claire shook her head. "He asked whether I had finally found someone who smiled at Ethan instead of smiling at the king." The sentence lingered between them while a cool breeze carried the scent of cedar across the porch. Claire realized that every peaceful morning, every shared meal, every quiet conversation had belonged to the real Ethan rather than the Alpha King the kingdom admired from afar. "I do not know if I should be angry," she whispered. "Or grateful." Ethan nodded slowly. "If you are both, I would understand." She smiled through tears. "You made that very difficult." He looked at her with complete sincerity. Claire, if you decide to leave after learning the truth, no one will stop you. Not the royal guard. Not the council. Not even me. I wanted your first choice to be free. Your second choice must be free as well. Claire stared at him in astonishment. A king who could command an entire kingdom was asking nothing from the woman who had unknowingly become his queen. In that quiet moment, she understood something even greater than his hidden identity. The strongest man she had ever met was also the one most willing to let her choose her own path. 3 days later, the valley gathered beneath a brilliant autumn sky as Ethan prepared to leave for the capital. Royal carriages waited quietly near the road while the people who had come to know him as a humble neighbor stood beside soldiers who now addressed him as their king. Nothing about the scene felt divided. Farmers, craftsmen, children, royal guards, and village elders all smiled with the same affection because, despite everything they had learned, Ethan had never changed. Claire stood on the porch holding the folded marriage agreement he had once carried in his pocket. She had spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about every conversation they had shared, every kindness he had quietly offered, and every choice he had allowed her to make without pressure. He had hidden his crown, but he had never hidden his character. Ethan walked toward her dressed in simple traveling clothes rather than royal robes. "The carriages are ready," he said softly. Claire nodded. "I know." He studied her face carefully, searching for an answer he refused to demand. "Whatever you decide today," he said, "I will honor it." Claire smiled gently. "You are still giving me a choice. It has always been yours." She looked beyond him toward the waiting procession stretching along the valley road. The polished banners, elegant horses, and respectful guards represented everything she had once believed impossible. Yet her thoughts returned instead to a much smaller memory. She remembered the quiet stranger standing alone inside Moonspire Temple with an old ash cane and a hopeful smile. She remembered accepting his proposal because she believed no one deserved to face life alone. She had not chosen a king that day. She had chosen a man whose quiet kindness reminded her of the goodness she still wanted to believe existed in the world. Claire slowly unfolded the marriage agreement one final time before carefully placing it into Ethan's hands. "When I signed this," she whispered, "I believed I was giving a lonely stranger a chance to build a peaceful life." Ethan lowered his eyes. "You did." She smiled through grateful tears. "Now I understand that you gave me exactly the same gift." Before Ethan could answer, Claire gently reached for his hand. "My first choice was made without knowing who you were." She intertwined her fingers with his. "My second choice is made because I finally do." Warm autumn sunlight illuminated the valley as a quiet smile spread across Ethan's face, brighter than any royal celebration could have been. "Does that mean?" Claire nodded before he finished. "I am not returning with a king." She squeezed his hand gently. "I am going home with my husband." A quiet murmur of joy spread through the gathered villagers. Samuel wiped away tears without embarrassment, while several royal guards exchanged relieved smiles. Even the commander lowered his head with obvious respect, not toward the Alpha King alone, but toward the woman who had freely chosen him twice. The journey back to the capital took 2 peaceful days. As the royal procession approached Blackwood Citadel, thousands of citizens filled the streets, eager to welcome home the ruler they had feared was lost. Bells echoed across the city while banners danced above stone towers reaching toward the bright afternoon sky. Claire looked through the carriage window with quiet amazement. She had entered Moonspire Temple believing no one wanted her. Now an entire kingdom waited to greet the woman standing beside its king. When Ethan stepped onto the palace staircase, every royal official bowed respectfully. He accepted their welcome with the same quiet humility Claire had always known. Then, before anyone could begin the formal ceremony, Ethan turned back toward the carriage. He extended his hand. Claire looked into his silver-gray eyes and saw the same gentle man who had once asked a rejected Omega for nothing more than a chance. She placed her hand in his. Together they climbed the final steps toward the palace entrance. The royal chancellor smiled warmly before addressing the assembled court. "Your Majesty," he announced, "the kingdom welcomes you home." Ethan shook his head with an easy smile before looking at Claire. "Home," he replied softly, "has never been a place." He gently lifted her hand. "It has always been the person willing to walk beside you." The palace courtyard fell into respectful silence before joyful applause filled the air. Claire looked across the faces surrounding them and realized something remarkable. No one celebrated because she had become a queen. They celebrated because their king had finally found someone who loved him long before discovering he wore a crown. As the evening sun bathed Blackwood Citadel in golden light, Ethan looked at the woman who had chosen kindness over appearances and whispered the words he had carried in his heart since the day they met inside Moonspire Temple. "Welcome home, my queen." And in that single quiet moment, every disguise disappeared forever, leaving only the simple truth that the greatest strength had never been hidden inside a throne, but inside two hearts willing to choose each other freely.